So this is innovation through biomimicry part 2. So in this video we're going to discuss about life principles, although I'm not going to discuss completely because I'm going to restrict this video to less than 1 hour, and a lot of people have suggested that the videos are too long, and people do not, it seems that people really do not have much time, or probably there's an attention issue, but we have to go in by the context of YouTube. So I'm going to restrict to 45 minutes or 40 to 50 minutes. So see, I need to be comprehensive, otherwise there is no point. So that is the reason I take a lot of time, and this is how I do things. And so yeah, so that is how it is. It is also apt to mention that I also conduct seminars, talks and presentations. I do workshops also on innovation through biomimicry. You can always contact me at dpalan@gmail. So we'll start with this video here, and this is Indian roller, and the roller is quite a well-known bird in India, and it's a state bird of many of the states in India. In fact, 7 states in India have Indian roller as the bird, as a state bird. So in life principle, we're going to discuss about the strategies which is utilized by species to survive. So obviously these are species which have survived for thousands and millions of years, and evolved and understanding, attuned to the surrounding, and evolved to survive. So what we can learn from this and how we can emulate the strategies which is followed by species is what we're going to discuss in this particular video, and of course we'll continue with the third video also. So this is in continuation with the last video we put in, that I put in, which is innovation through biomimicry. So in this video I'm going to discuss about, first I'm going to start with what we left in the earlier video, that is life principle. So this particular picture has been taken from Biomimicry 3.8. I really could not find anything better than this particular picture to depict the whole idea of innovation through biomimicry and how to understand biomimicry. So you can see the green strip is where the life principles are mentioned, and the outer one is the limiting parameters or Earth's operating condition, which we discussed in the last session, and the center one is the subdivision of all the life principles. So we are going to start discussing with each of these life principles, and we're going to discuss about how it is seen in nature and also how human beings are trying to emulate it. So we're going to discuss all this. The first one is be locally attuned and responsive, then use life-friendly chemistry, be resource efficient, integrate development with growth, evolve to survive, adapt to changing conditions, and this is how we're going to start. So the first one is be locally attuned and responsive. Under that we have subsections, that is, first one is use feedback loop, leverage cyclical processes, cultivate cooperative relationship, use readily available material and energy. So we're going to discuss each one of this separately. So each organism is fitting into and integrated intimately with the surrounding. It is intimately attuned to the environment. It is aligned with the realities of what of a particular place and other living beings. So individual species survival depends upon recognizing local conditions and opportunities, locating and managing resources, and responding appropriately to information which is garnered. So environment presents a particular challenge. For instance, we have on the left side here a Namib desert beetle. Now this beetles are found in the desert. Obviously there is no water. So what it does is that every evening, dusk time, it goes to the top side of the hill, and it presents itself in such position so that it is able to kind of trap the water droplets or humidity and the mist. So it has some hydrophobic and hydrophonic structures on its back, so it is able to kind of utilize that as a channel. The hydrophilic will be able to attract the water, and the hydrophobic is producing the channel to make the drops reach its mouth. So it is attuned to the surrounding, and it's able to survive by taking water out of mist. So this has been copied or emulated by human beings also. In South American regions there are a lot of water shortage, and in the coastal regions there is a lot of humidity in the air. So they have created this water trapping fog moisture, which is able to kind of trap the fog moisture, and the water gets collected and it's utilized. So this is how we are able to kind of understand from the nature and try to emulate it. And also then if you have to survive, you have to be kind of you have to be aware of the temperature, humidity, sunlight, and also the other creatures which is living. So there's a selection process that shapes the organism's adaptation, and life solves functional needs in context. So it always exists in context to the problem always exists in context to the surrounding. So a successful species therefore able to fit into the larger context and adapt as conditions change. So this also has, apart from of course the innovation we can learn from this, there's also organizational or managerial input, and that is a manager needs to understand that one size does not fit all, and has to have strong sense of resources, challenges and opportunities that the culture or the place presents. So it also means that you need to eliminate the hierarchy. So I've discussed this in my another video, which is biomimetic managers. You can go through it. So we are going to discuss use feedback loop, which is a subsection of locally attuned. Now obviously feedback is a very important, significant way to locally attune to the surrounding. So there is always life is always constantly communicating both within and across the species, and there is a signaling and responding which is happening, which is a real-time feedback. It's a continuous response and adjustments. So everything in nature is almost always in an alert phase, because it has to kind of survive. Now look at this picture here. You have a gazelle which is being chased by a cheetah. So there is a feedback loop which is happening. Gazelle is aware that the cheetah is chasing, and cheetah is. So there is a feedback loop. There is a real-time feedback loop, which is actually short, strong, and cyclical. It's a well-defined between signaler and receiver, and it's immediately implemented. So what can we learn from this, and what are the implements which is available? For instance, this on the right side we have this feedback of the voltage which is consumed, instantaneous feedback. So which means if I have this, so I would know this is voltmeter. So I would know that this much is consumed. So I would be careful not to consume more. So I'm getting a real-time feedback. So like that we can have for traffic violation, so that people realize that if they violate, they have to pay this much, and if it is a instantaneous feedback, so it helps to control. So we are going to discuss leverage cyclical processes, which is another subsection of locally attuned and responsive. So in nature there are a lot of cyclical processes which can be taken advantage of. So there are events and patterns that repeat itself. So if you are adapted to the if you are attuned to the local condition, you will be aware of these cyclical processes and utilize that for your survival. And if you look at the left side, there is a saguaro cactuses which is found in Arizona, Mexico region, and these are iconic species, and if you've seen Wild West movies, these are almost always a presence. Now there are bats which this particular species utilizes the movement of migration of bats. So what happens when the bats is migrating towards north during summer, and this species start producing flower which has nectar, so which helps in the pollination by the bats. And later when the fruits become seeds, when the fruits are formed, the seeds are also dispersed in the return migration. So this particular species is able to utilize bats and both the completely. So it's a very good survival strategy. We'll have a lot of examples like this in nature. So the question now is, what can we learn from this and how can we apply? And we also have a lot of cyclical processes, a lot of processes which keeps on repeating itself. So can we tap and tap energy from that? For instance, we have this wave energy. It's surprising that we don't have too much of the world has so much of coastal regions and so much of ocean waves, and we should be able to tap the cyclical process of ocean waves as well as the tides. So that is, and also in the earlier slide we discussed about utilizing nets, mist nets, to capture humidity in the water. So these are examples of decentralized or off-grid small-scale energy production, and in nature nothing is centralized. So as we have decentralized energy production or water production or power production, these are examples which is very closely emulating nature. So we can have decentralized small scale off-grid electric generation through tapping the cyclical processes. So predictability of operating condition becomes important for species to thrive. So it creates a unique and context specific adaptations. So the next one under locally attuned and responsive is use readily available material and energy. So this principle asks us to consider what is right here in abundance right now. So what is there in abundance which is abundantly available resource which vary with time and space. So nature always taps on what is available in abundance. So for instance, wind is always abundant, and that is why plants have many of the plants have adapted to utilize this available energy to disperse seeds. A very beautiful example here is of dandelion, how it is dispersing seeds. The other day I had gone for a walk and I had this mahogany tree seeds. It actually bursts in the air. It's a pod, and these seeds start sliding down and start rotating, and it flies off to distant places. So these are different ways of dispersal of seeds which is utilizing the available energy. So the question here is, what can we learn from it? And so we have this available energy, which is, I am surprised this is not being utilized quite frequently, as we don't really see much about it. That is the electrical crystals, which converts mechanical energy into electrical energy. And this is an example of Tokyo Station, where a lot of footfalls are there, and you can utilize that to create energy for utilizing the instruments or appliances which is there. So you don't have to. It's a decentralized power, off-grid power generation. So other day I had gone for a walk on the beach, and I found this huge seeds, which was which I checked it out and found it's called a snuff box sea bean because previously they used to cut it and put snuff inside it. It's actually Entera-gigas, and these are found in Central America and Africa. So it came all the way from America and Africa to Indian coast, and because of it was able to utilize the energy available, that is the ocean currents. So this is a very common example which you see around here in India. So I conduct workshops and talks and seminars, and generally try to use as much as local habitat and local species as possible. It's a very common sight, and here these are called the cattle egrets, and they actually follow the cows. The simple reason is that when the cows moves around and it plucks the grass while it grazing the grass, it tends to disturb the insects, and the insects comes out and they start flying. So they are waiting for that, and the cattle egrets are able to kind of have its meal. So obviously it's very simple example of how it is utilizing the energy. It is energy which is produced by other species. So there's a kind of a symbiotic relation going on here. So another way of locally attuned available energy is nature always taps on weaker forces. For instance, the last video we discussed about hydrogen bonds and how becomes an important characteristic of water, and how surface tension, adhesion, cohesion, and how species are able to tap it. You may please visit my first video on innovation through biomimicry, part 1. Other weak forces are static electricity or van der Waals forces, which lizards use. We'll discuss that later. So now we're going to focus on static electricity or electrostatic force, which is produced while the honey bees are when they flap, they tend to lose electrons, and in the process they acquire a positive charge. In the meanwhile, there's a positive gradient which exists in flowers, because there is always 100 voltage gradient on every meter from the ground. So these are new findings actually. This is I think 2 years back they found that the bees and the pollen grains started attracting each other before actually the bees sits on the nectar for the nectar on the flowers. And also the way the bees and flowers are communicating is something beyond human range. For instance, the flower here on the left side is what human beings perceive as yellow flower, whereas the bees perceive it as the flower perceives in the center one, where there is a clear demarcation on where it could land and where it could pursue the nectar, while the right side is where the bees is communicating, the flowers is communicating with the bees. So there is a lot of communication which is happening in the nature which human beings cannot even perceive. So the chances of survival actually increases when the individuals are good at recognizing local conditions and opportunities, and managing available resources, and responding appropriately. So the last one under this section is cultivate cooperative relationship. And this is a misconception that in nature everything is in competition with each other. In fact, survival the fittest is a word which is commonly used and which has been utilized by social Darwinism and been taken by the neoliberal economic way of understanding world, and which has created so much of havoc. In fact, this line was not even given by Darwin, and probably it was given by Herbert Spencer. So in nature there is not much of competition. In fact, they avoid competition because of waste of energy, unless and until there is some specific reasons, or but more examples of mutualism and cooperative relationship and symbiotic relationship is what we found in nature. In fact, our own survival is dependent on mutualism. For instance, in our body there is the digestive system is dependent on bacteria. So the symbiotic relation which is existing in our body itself is an example of our survival. It's an example of mutualism. So because survival the fittest, if one species dominates and outperforms, that is not how the nature functions, because then the system will collapse. So in nature, fit means so when you say survival the fittest, the fit here means that it is most well adapted to the condition. It is able to optimize energy and able to partner well with others to increase the chance of survival. So in nature there are many relationships and very few direct competition. And mutualism most powerful when between unusual allies. For instance, we have this example which is very common example of clownfish and sea anemone, and so mutualism tend to increase during the time of stress. Like for instance, if you've seen some videos of the National Geography videos where Serengeti, and we have this during the drought condition. It's striking to see that during drought condition the species actually don't start fighting with each other. There's a lot of tolerance, and you must have seen these crocodiles, the monkeys, and other species. They are just as the resources become less, they don't start fighting. In fact, the tolerance becomes much more, and cooperation increases. So these are examples from nature, and again asserting that this idea of competition, or the idea that survival the fittest in terms of being the best, in terms of subjugating others, which is being taken by neoliberal value systems, is actually need to be rethought. So we're going to the second life principle, which is evolve to survive, and in that we're going to discuss about replicate strategies that work and integrate the unexpected and reshuffle information. So evolve to survive here is continually incorporate and embody information to ensure enduring performance. We'll discuss this in detail in the coming slides. So we're going to discuss replicate strategies that work, which is the first subsection which comes under evolve to survive. Now, we think that evolution is only about change. It's only confined to change, but evolution is more than change. It is about repeating successful approaches. It is about institutionalizing adaptation that works. For instance, you have this crows here. Crows comes under corvid family, and corvid families of birds are one of the most smartest one. You have magpie, you have tree pies, which comes under this. So they are able to utilize the instrument to pluck out caterpillars or worms. You can also see this in chimpanzees and other species also. Now the offsprings tend to learn from this and replicate this, but for a species to successful, these adaptation need not be confined to individual level. It has to be replicated. This solutions have to be replicated and embedded in the genetic diversity for it to have a genetic shift. For instance, it has to be codified into genes to replicate strategies. So it has to go to a much deeper level. So it has to go to a genetic level. And what works for the species to survive or thrive is passed to the next generation. and it is ingrained, embedded into genes and passed to the next generation. What does not is actually lost, it's weeded out, and genes die out and is not passed and becomes extinct. So that is what we call natural selection. This you can see in very fast replicating bacteria, how it is producing superbugs. In fact, in human beings, democracy is a very good example of adaptive systems which replicate strategies that work, because if the society has to survive, it has to be attuned to the realities, and it has to evolve to survive. And democracy is a very important, very grassroots level representation is a very important way of society to replicate strategies or weed out which does not work and survive ideally. Now, from another human example is bicycles here, and in fact, the bicycles were invented in 1870, and there's a big story behind it. In 1817, in 1815, there was a huge volcanic eruption in Indonesia, the Mount Tambora, and it erupted, and it was such a huge eruption or explosion that it had a cooling effect on almost all part of the world, and it killed crops, and there was a famine. In fact, the year 1816 is also known as the year of without summer, and it had become very severe, and during those times horses were used to pull carts, and it was to help human beings to travel faster, and it was where there was no mechanized vehicles in. So cycle was in fact invented as horseless travel, because the horses needed fuel and food, and because of the famine, the horses were not being fed. So that is why the mechanized option was found, and cycles were invented, and was horseless travel. So having found interesting details of history of cycle, let's now focus on how it is replicating strategies. For instance, the 1816 or 17, or during the early 18th century, what the cycle which we see here is different from, not entirely different, but what we see on the right side is a new latest model. So here we are replicating strategies that work. For instance, two wheels is a strategy which worked, but the pedal on the front wheel is a strategy that did not work. So there are, as you can see, it is similar in certain ways, and there are many strategies which does not work, is being weeded out. A very good example of replicate strategies that work. Now, somebody has said the essence of reality is mathematics. Now, this is the flowers and petals of flower, and the number of petals of flower is also indicated here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, and so on. And this is what we call Fibonacci series. So you add the earlier one, and then you proceed to the next one. So 1 plus 1 is 1, and 1 plus 2 is 3, 3 plus 2 is 5, 5 plus 3 is 8, 8 plus 13 is 21, and 21 plus 13 is 34, and so on. So it is a series, which is what we call Fibonacci series. And if you look at the way the flowers are arranged, or the way the leaves are arranged, it tends to follow this particular number series. And of course, the way the leaves are arranged, or the flowers, the petals are arranged, is to maximize the exposure. In case of leaves, it is for maximizing sun rays or rain. So obviously there is an iterative process which is happening in nature, which has created this kind of a pattern which is more optimized, and that is where we are able to codify that in terms of mathematics. So obviously I think it was Pythagoras who actually did work on mathematics and music. In fact, there is some sort of a strain which is happening, which tend to represent some sort of a hidden aesthetic order. So this example of Fibonacci series is, if you look at it further, and you divide the earlier number with the latter, and like for instance, if you divide 2 by 1, you get 2, and you divide 3 by 2, and so on, you reach a number which is what we call phi, phi, which is 1.61803 repeating, so which is an irrational number. So obviously it means that as the plant grows, we have a possibility where it will not be repeated. So which means the pattern will not be repeated, and there has always been there's always petals which will be able to expose to the sun rays or water. So also if you take the 360 degrees and divide that by 1.618, you get one of the most optimal angle, that is 137, and that is if you have one petal which is at straight line, and the next petal will be at 137 degrees for it to be optimal, and you repeat that, it does not repeat, it does not fall one over other. So you have this irrational number does not follow one over other. So it's a very interesting example and interesting study. Maybe you could study this further. So continuing Fibonacci series, if you plot that in a graph, and you have this 1:1 square, and then you have 2:1, and then you have 3:2, and then you have 5:3, and then 5:8, and you create that square and you plot the graph and you extend the line from one corner to another and you extend that further, you get a spiral. And this is an example of continual mathematically balanced expansion. So you will see that in species, you will see that as you grow further into, say, cyclone or universe, the way it is designed, because as the system tends to expand, there's a continual expansion which happens. There's a mathematically balanced expansion which happens. So this you will see not only in the smallest places, but you also see in the universe. And it also shows that what works at the small scale, it should also work at the bigger scale. So if it cannot work at the small scale, it cannot work at the bigger scale. So this is a learning we can have it for democracy. If the democracy has to be successful, it has to be successful at the grassroots level. Now if it has successful at the grassroots level, it has to be successful at the home. So if the family is not democratic, there is no value system which is associated with listening to others or other liberty or equality and things like that. If in the family itself there is no democracy, then it is very difficult for the society to have democracy, and that is the reason probably the democracy is failing in most of the societies, because there is no value system which nurtures democracy. So we're going to discuss about integrate the unexpected, which is the second part of evolve to survive. And in nature makes a lot of mistakes, and millions of species are there because of the mistake, and that is what we call genetic mutation. And genetic mutation, as you probably know, is genetic mistakes. For instance, the example of elephant here, the elephants did not have wrinkled skins, and there was a genetic mutation which created this wrinkled skin and helped elephant. Therefore it was adapted and it became part of natural selection, and it helped the elephant because it helped him to grow in size, and not only that, it wrinkled skin helped to dissipate heat. So it was a genetic mutation which helped the elephant. And I was reading in Italy, they found a mutant protein that was able to remove cholesterol in some section of society, some section of people. So, and also there was an accident somewhere in US, and they found that some of the people are not having bone fractures, and they found that the bones were much denser. So there's some sort of a mutation which is happening. Or for instance, in Africa there's a mutant RBC which curves to prevent malaria. So previously this genetic mutation would have taken millions of years to percolate to major part of the society or the population, but now we have the wherewithal and understanding, so we can take these mutants and we can embed it, or we can what we call splicing, and we can work out things to reduce our we can take the advantages of this kind of mutations which is happening. Also, from human perspective, the mistakes have led to a lot of inventions and discoveries. For instance, you have X-rays, and X-ray was a complete surprise. In fact, Rontgen, when he discovered the X-rays, he was not even trying to discover it. He was in 1895. He was studying some electric current passing through gases at low pressure, and he had kept some photographic plate, and it was complete by mistakenly he had kept that, and it started glowing, and he studied this further, and he could not understand what exactly these rays are, and he called them X-rays, and later on it came to know that it is high frequency electromagnetic radiation. So, or even penicillin, Fleming found, and what the most important to prevent infection is antibiotic, and it was part of a kind of a mistake, and he left his jar open and it started producing bacteria and so on. So, or a contemporary example, very simple example would be 3M sticky glue notes, which you see was clever use of mistake. For instance, they wanted to make glue, and the glue was came out quite weak, but then they produced this reusable glue. So the question here is, if mistake is what helps us, and mistake is a very important part of learning and growing, then why is our education system not encouraging mistakes? In fact, in our education system, in our examination system, if you make a mistake, you are actually penalized. You get less marks, or marks are reduced. So the idea here is to point out that in nature, mistake is not dismissed. In fact, mistake has a lot of way to learn. So maybe this could be factored in when we understand that the mistake cannot be taken or need not be taken as something wrong. So we're going to discuss the reshuffle information, which is also another section of the last section of evolve to survive. A combination of information from two different sources guarantees variety, and variety increases the diversity of response. It enhances the chances of survival, and that is why we need to be concerned about species vanishing and the number of deaths which is happening. For instance, forest fire in Australia, billions of species have died. So it reduces the genetic pool, and it reduces the opportunity for something new to occur. So as the genetic variety increases, it enlarges the pools of alternatives. So there is, for instance, if you look at the rice, the variety of rice which you find in the market, the number of very less. There are thousands of varieties of rice which is there. In fact, I visited a person who had a own museum of about 700 varieties of rice, and which had different characteristics. For instance, some of these varieties could grow in drought-like conditions, and there are different genetic varieties. And if these are vanishing, it threatens we as a species also. Now, take for instance sexual reproduction. Now here, both these parents are bringing genetic material, so the offspring is getting half of each. So organism brings their DNA information, what we call information library, but half is implemented in creating offspring. So we have to understand that this is a very important understanding which can be applied when we are taking decision making. We need to bring as much diverse opinion as possible, and as a leader, as a biomimetic leader, we need not be having so much of plan and control on everything. We should be kind of willing to let go with other ideas of others and approaches and strategies. So combining the best of creativity while welcoming an equal contribution from another who may not be thinking on the same as you, or you may not even like the way the other person is ideas of other person, but it creates an open mind to understand that every life form, as I mentioned earlier, the sexual reproduction is where information is coming from two different sources to create new. So if the nature is favoring that to increase diversity, then a biomimetic manager has a lot to learn from it. And if you want to innovate the way life does, the evolutionary approach to leader would try to kind of understand things, fail fast, incorporate what works, and let go what does not. So one need to have an accommodative value system, ability to search for truth in each idea. So I have discussed this in detail in Biomimetic Manager, which is one of my videos. Maybe you could go through it. So we're going to discuss the third life principle, that is integrate development with growth. Under this, we're going to discuss about self-organize, build from bottom up, and combine modular and nested components. So integrating development with growth, what it essentially means is that we have to balance growth and with available resource. Growth is adding something new, whereas development would be creating a foundation to accommodate this change, that is growth. So it's a kind of infrastructure. Now we have this embryo. Embryo is a very good example where there is a coordination between development and growth. So first there is a foundation, that is the this bone and structure and organs are created, and out of that the growth happens. So that is how nature progresses. It's what we call accretional development. So first we need to have infrastructure developed. For instance, the right side we have a very well planned city, that is New York, and you have everything so planned. So when you have the essential development in place, then the growth becomes possible. So this is an example where there is no integration of development with growth. So you have this example from a city in Bangalore, which is in India. So you have this example where there's a lot of traffic jam because there is no infrastructure development. So you are having growth without infrastructure development. So this is precisely what happens when you don't have stable, locally tuned development before each growth phase. So when there is a growth without development, it becomes unsustainable and unstable, as this example of traffic jams actually shows. And also please, we are actually optimizing growth. We are not, the intention is never to maximize growth. So nature always optimizes, and with optimization there is a greater likelihood of long-term success. So for long-term sustainability requires a balance between development and growth. So we are going to discuss self-organize, which comes under integrating development with growth. And in nature everything is self-organized. There is no CEO or supervisor, but even then everything gets done perfectly well. And self-organization is how it's a dynamic process. It's a complex adaptive system, and which there is no external control or centralized control, which results in flexibility and robustness. And you will see this in social insects, birds, fishes, schools of fishes. So it's an iterative feedback system, and how we can learn from that is through self-organization at the grassroots level. You have Dr. Varghese Kurian starting out this Gujarat Milk Federation. So we have a lot of examples of grassroots level democracy, which is much more connected to reality, and also because it is connected to, attuned to the surrounding, it tends to be, the self-organization becomes much more adaptive. I have discussed self-organization under swarm intelligence in Biomimetic Manager in detail. But human beings are different from other social insects, because human beings have as they have individuality, in the sense that they have ego, they have other parameters which is working, and it has been seen that research has shown that self-organization works at a higher level in human beings if three conditions are fulfilled. One is there is high level of trust, second is there is an open communication, and third there is a strong value system. Everything about organization or how the manager can function or learn from nature, I have discussed that in Biomimetic Manager. Please go through it. So how the companies have been successfully able to adapt the algorithms from social insects like ants in solving their logistic problems, all that have been discussed in Biomimetic Manager, my separate video. Please go through it. So we're going to discuss build from the bottom up, and that is precisely how nature functions, in the sense that it moves from it grows from lower aspect and started accruing and grow further. So it is a bottom up process, that is it uses the resources and energy which is available at that given point of time, and then creates a condition conducive for further growth and development to happen. And this process of bottom up is now been now been emulated by human beings also, in terms of revolutionary invention through 3D printing. Previously what we called subtractive manufacturing, where a lot of material was wasted because of chiseling and cutting. But now through 3D printing we are very close to how life grows, and that is through additive manufacturing. So which is a layer of different materials which is added on, and it creates integrate complex architect within layers. So in fact we can also program, and we can have algorithms which can feed in properties, and we can have structures which is very intricate and complex, and we can have even have nano building blocks, and through that a lot of examples of nano cellulose and nano collagen and nano chitin, which is very closely emulating nature, or the way organism grows. Now, one line about 3D printing, it is what we call fourth part of what we call fourth industrial revolution. The first one was the steam engine, the coal-based steam engine, which started in the 18th century, and the second was electric power, which led to mass production Henry Ford cars, and the third one was the digital in 1970s, the digital and electronic applied electronics, electronic became IT revolution. This fourth industrial revolution, which is happening for the last few years, and 3D printing is a very important part of it, apart from genetic editing and quantum computing and digital and biological and all these nanotech and biotech and all coming together. So it's a very interesting time, and 3D printing is closely emulating how life functions. So this is an example of 3D printed vehicle or car here, and as you can see, there are a few things. One is that because of additive manufacturing, there is no material waste, and secondly, as you can see, a lot of places where the material has not been used. I discussed that in my first video, that is innovation through biomimicry part 1, where we discussed about slime mold, and we took the algorithm of slime mold and we put material where it is needed, where a lot of stress is there, and took away material where there is no much stress. And you can see certain lightest places where the material is less used, and using that and using 3D printing, because 3D printing can create intricate manufacturing process, and we can also customize. So there's a lot of revolution which is happening. In fact, the whole idea, the whole manufacturing process has completely changed. There's a complete change. So we're going to discuss about combined modular and nested components. Nature fits multiple units within each other progressively from simple to complex. So take this example of wasp here. So what wasp does is that it creates a stalk and few cells, and then it lays egg. And once the egg hatches, it gets more helpers, and it builds more cells, and who can feed more larvae. So it's a modular approach of construction which matches the size and effort of the workforce and resources. So it's an incremental progress. So we can, as a human equivalent, we have these cubicles. So as the workforce increases, you can add more. As the workforce there's an attrition or shrinking, so you can reduce. So it's a flexible arrangement. Also, if you look at the structure, the cell walls are shared. So you have these cubicles with the cell walls, or you have this wasp nest. The cell walls are shared, and also which is efficient utilization of optimal utilization of resources. Also, if you look at this wasp nest, the size, the shape is structurally also very stable. So you have this hexagonal shape, which is so each cell is having 120 degrees angle, so which cancel out all the mechanical stress. So in all, evolution has seen that not only it is optimal utilization of resources, but it's also structurally more effective. So we're going to discuss life-friendly chemistry. Under that, build selectively with small subset of elements, break down products into benign constituents. So there is a misconception that chemicals are human-made entities, but nature is alive with chemistry. The difference here is nature's chemistry is conducive, creating conditions conducive to life, because it cannot really produce hazardous toxic elements, chemicals, or deplete their resources. So they have to create conditions conducive to life. There are a lot of examples of chemical warfare in nature. For instance, take the example of giraffe and acacia. Acacia is the leaves which is giraffe actually found very tasteful. And the first is the acacia heights have kept on increasing. And second is when the giraffe started browsing this acacia leaves, it releases ethylene gas, and which raises the tannin level of leaves of the nearby tree, making it toxic as indigestible. So it prevents over browsing. So the backbone of life is biochemistry. In fact, living world has spent 3.8 billion years to figure out how to solve challenges. and the process of assembling molecules to achieve needed function. Life assembles relatively few elements efficiently, effectively, and elegantly. A vast amount of chemistry, we use only 28 elements in fact out of 118, and human beings use all the toxic elements, and these are all benign elements. And in nature, what is abundant is golden, and for human being, what is rare is in fact literally gold. So that is the difference. In fact, take the example of DNA. DNA is the genetic instruction for development and functioning of all living organisms. So it's a blueprint, and DNA is made of only 5 elements. What can be more remarkable than that? So life assembles molecules in sophisticated ways using elegant recipes. So nature chemistry works by fitting different compounds. So nature gives shapes to molecules that fits in like lock and key, that leads to reaction. So unlike human beings, what we do is heat, beat and treat, and high temperature and high pressure and toxic elements, and you create high pressure and energy and heat to slam molecules into each other to react. So and you get a byproduct, and but in the process there is a lot of byproduct and wastes and toxic elements, and material is also lost. So nature does it more elegantly. Millions of years of evolution has seen that species are utilizing nanostructures to reflect light in such a way that certain wavelengths are amplified, and this is how they produce color. This is what we call structural coloration, and this is something which has been explored in detail in the last few years, and it is one of the most exciting field. And if you can see that it not only has optical function, it also has thermal function, which means the material can be manipulated to utilize to produce light and heat. And you have applications of this in cameras, sensors, optical devices, cosmetic textiles, paints, optical coatings, and security labels, and so on. We'll discuss this further in the next video. I'm going to stop here. We'll discuss structural coloration in detail in the next video, and we'll continue with life cycles, because almost 45 minutes, and I would like to stop here because as I said in the earlier slide that I'm told that you need to restrict less than 1 hour. So thank you. We'll join next session in the next video.